Now let's build our load level panel. We're gonna go into our new game canvas, and I think what we'll do is just duplicate it, and let's create a load game canvas. We'll disable that new game canvas temporarily, and then expand out the load game canvas. We can do these as panels, by the way, instead of canvases, but I like separating them out. It makes it a lot easier to understand what's going on and to figure things out, and it's easy to adjust back and forth, and we can get some nice performance benefits from keeping them separate like this. So let's take a look at our load game canvas. We have 2 buttons on it. I don't want either one of these buttons really. Well, I kind of want the load game button. So let's delete the new game button, and let's create a new panel in here. We'll right click, choose UI, and choose panel. I'm going to center this so that it's not so big, so that it's just kind of in the middle. Let's do a center right here and make it 600 wide. So I've got this nice centered panel here where I can put all of my buttons. I'm going to take the load game button and drag it on to be a child of that panel. I'm going to rename this panel to games list panel. It's got all of my games, or at least it will. And then let's go modify our load game button. So our load game button here is a little bit taller than I want. I'm going to shrink it to about 100 high. And then let's see, we've got our load button script. Let's go turn this into a prefab next. So go to the prefabs folder with our load button kind of shrunk down a little bit. We'll drag our load game button in and make it into a prefab. Now we're going to go to this games list panel. We're going to create a new script for it that's going to use that prefab and instantiate one for every saved game that we have. To do that, we'll create a new script for our games list panel. Go to the scripts folder, right click, create a new C# script and call this games list panel. We'll assign that to our games list panel by selecting it and then just dragging it on. My code editor popped up for me. Nice, but not what I wanted right now. So as soon as it finishes, we will collapse that shader down and drag the games list panel right here onto the games list panel in the inspector. Now let's open up that script and add a place for our load game button prefab. I'm going to delete out my start. Well, let's delete out, let's just start up here. We'll delete those in a moment, maybe. We'll start by adding a serialized field. And this is going to be of a load game button. And we'll call this button prefab. Let's call this load game button. No, let's just call it button prefab. Keep it nice and short. There's only one button type that I've got on here. Now, when we load this object up, maybe when it enables instead of it starts, I want to go through and set up all of the buttons. So I will delete the start and update. We'll select all the way 9 through 19 and delete and add an on enable so that when this thing turns on, that's when we do the loading. So that way, every time we turn it on, we can get new sets of buttons if we've got new levels loaded. We don't want to just do it once when we start the game up or when we well, actually, technically, we could probably just do it once when we load the menu up. So let's change this to start. We'll change it back to start instead of on enable. It'll simplify things. We won't have to clear up the buttons, so we're not going to get any new buttons, new menus, or new games until we go back into the menu anyway. So we've got our start method here, and what we want to do is loop through all of the games that we have saved. So we want to say for each var game name in game manager dot instance dot all game names. Now this should already be filled out because this is loaded in our awake of the game manager. If this was in the start of our game manager, this would be a problem because it may or may not be ready. Since it's in awake and this is in start, not in on enable or awake, we know that all game names will have been filled out before this ever gets called. That's because awake and on enable get called before start. So we're going to loop through each game name, and we want some braces here because we're going to do more than one thing. The first thing we're going to do is instantiate a button for each game. So say var button equals instantiate, which is the method to create an object at runtime, and we're going to pass in our button prefab. So this is going to spawn our button prefab on the UI, but first, before we do that, we need to give it one more parameter, which is the parent that it's going to have. And we want the parent to be this game list panel, so we'll just say transform to pass in our transform. It really wants not a component object, but a transform to be the parent, so we pass in our own transforms. Now we've got a button here. The next thing I want to do is assign the game name to the button. So we'll say button dot set, let's just say game name. Let's make a method. Set game name, and we'll pass in our game name. No, we'll just assign the game name. Let's do it like that. Game name equals, and we'll just assign it as the game name. Now we could do both ways. This will make it so that we're setting the property instead of calling a method. It's a little bit simpler, and there's really not a good benefit in using a method right now. So we're going to go with the simpler way. We'll hit Alt-Enter, and we'll generate a property for it. So I hit Enter right there, and now if I hit F12, I should have a public string game name. So this is the game name for this button. Now, oh, you know what? I lied. I do want to call this make a set game name method. So let's change this. We'll call set game name, and we'll pass in our game name parameter. Then we'll hit Alt-Enter, and we'll generate a method for that. I'm going to get rid of that extra spacing there, hit F12, and let's go take a look. So the reason that I want to do that is because if I just set this game name here, it's not going to update the text. But if I set the game name as a private thing and then update the text in my set game name method, I'll get a nice UI update. So let's delete out line 7 here. And on line 15, let's say underscore game name equals game name. We'll generate a private field for that. So now we've got just a private string that can't be read by other things. And then let's update our text mesh pro text. So we'll say get component in children tmp underscore text. That's going to be the text object that's a child of this button. And then we need our open close parentheses to get the object and dot to reference a property on it or a method. We want to reference the set text method and pass in our game name. So now we're saving off the game name in this method, which is why we used a method instead of a field or a property. And then setting the text here. Well, that's really why we're using the method instead. I'm going to change this to be public just so that it matches and get rid of this private keyword that I don't need so that we're consistent. We'll save, and now if I go into Unity, I should be able to see my buttons appear, but there's one thing I want to modify first before we do that. First, let's save this, save our games list panel, and then go back into Unity, and we're going to add a component to make our buttons stack up. So if we go to the games list panel, we can add a layout group. We can either do a vertical layout group, a grid layout group, or a horizontal layout group. I'm just going to go with let's go with a grid layout group for now, and we'll set the cell size to 600. Grid layout group kind of auto controls the size of all of the buttons and everything. Makes it really easy to work with. We'll save, and then we can delete this load game button that's a child of our games list panel. Go make sure that our games list panel has the button prefab assigned, which it doesn't. So I've got my games list panel selected. I'll hit the search button, see if I can find my asset, and look at that. It found it. If yours can't find it though, you can just go down to the folder. Oh, it actually found the wrong thing, so we're not going to use that. Don't use the search box because I didn't realize it searched in the scene and it found the wrong thing. So instead, we want to look at assets, and you'll see that it has none. Let's go down to the prefabs folder though and just take the load game button and drag it on. We don't want to be spawning this disabled one here. That's not the right object. We want to be spawning and referencing the one down here in the prefab. So select your games list panel, click on the button prefab. Oops. Let's see, click on the button prefab, not the script, and make sure that it's selecting this one right here. Now, if I save and press play with this canvas up, I expect to see all of my saved games pop up here, and there they are. I can click on one of my saved games and load right in. Let's go over here, maybe take a little bit of damage on the saved game. What is this, game 2, the second one there? I lost track of the time. We'll force it to save. Let's stop playing, go back in, and make sure that we're loading the correct data. I should see my health be at 2 when I click on this game right here. Oh, and I don't. Now the reason for this is pretty simple, so I want to leave it as a little challenge at first. See if you can figure out, taking a look at the load game button, why we're not loading the proper game. Go ahead and view it, see if you can figure out what's going on, and then I'll run you through the solution. You can build the solution if you want, but if not, don't worry, I'm going to show you in just a second. Just go ahead and pause and take a look at it. Okay, so hopefully you noticed that what happens is we call load game, and we go into our game manager load game method, and then we load game 1. Every time we load, we're not actually using the game name of that method or of that button. So we need to make our load game method take the game name as a parameter. So first thing I'm going to do is copy our game name and add that as a parameter to my call to load game. That's going to give me an error saying that no overload for load game takes 1 argument. So I'll hit F12 and we'll change that. We'll add a parameter to load game, say string game name. And then instead of calling getString on game 1, we'll call getString on game name. We'll save that off, go into Unity, and now we should load the proper game. Oh, we have an error here. Let's make sure that I've not typoed anything. Do a quick build. Oh, I didn't build. That's why my file wasn't saved, so it wasn't calling the proper method. Now that my build is done, it should work. Let's hit play. And then try loading that game again and see if we have our modified health. So here we go. Let's go. We'll go grab a couple coins. Make sure that we're saving, because we weren't actually saving to the correct game. We were saving to a blank game. We'll go take some damage. 1, 2. I've got 7 coins and 2 damage. We'll leave the level, load the level, press play, and then reload our game. And here we go. We've got our saved data and everything's working right. So let's go into Plastic and say that we added support for multiple saved games. And check in.